Hey, this is David Rovix hosting another live stream broadcast, which is appearing on the Facebook pages of Popular Resistance, KBOO, KBOO Community Radio, and various other platforms. Uh, since the pandemic hit and I had to stop touring, I've taken to interviewing people of interest live on the internet, which, as of this week, is an activity I'm mainly doing on Tuesdays and Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, noon Central, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. GMT, along with a house concert from my living room on the last Saturday of every month at 1 p.m. Pacific, and various other live streaming and podcasting activities that don't occur on a regular schedule. Every Tuesday, the broadcast has an actual producer, longtime Detroit area talk show host, and Fifth Estate magazine editorial collective member Peter Werby. These days, Fifth Estate is a quarterly print magazine that has been published in one form or another since its founding in 1965. The summer issue is hot off the presses. You can subscribe to it at fifthestate.org and hear previous episodes of Fifth Estate Live there as well. Today's guest, Franklin Lopez, has for over 2 decades now been creating powerful, surreal, inspiring, as well as very informative short and long films, from music videos to full-length documentaries and a whole lot else, under the banner of Submedia TV. Hailing from the occupied island of Puerto Rico, last I checked, he makes Montreal his home these days. Great to have you on the show, Franklin.
Yeah, thanks a lot, David, and thanks to Peter for setting this up.
Yeah. And the last time I saw you, I think, was like a year after the big uprising in Montreal. I think I was there in 2013, and all that I missed all those protests in 2012. Somehow never managed to get there. But you were there then, and that was quite a time to be in Montreal, was it?
I actually caught the tail end of it. So
on the tail end, you got there late too. Oh.
Yeah, I was actually touring in Europe and looking from afar and just having so much fucking FOMO. And yet, I was also in Europe, and so I was just like, I was totally torn apart. But I did get there for one of the last big marches in that July. But by that time, things had definitely slowed down. But the feeling in the city was still pretty amazing. I did a screening at an alley, and there was hundreds of people at the screening. I mean, it was a really nice welcome to finish my tour in Montreal at the tail end of the student strike.
Outdoor film screening, and there was a lot of that going on at the time. A lot of big projecting of all sorts of things on buildings. I remember around that time in Montreal. I don't know if that's become generally a more common phenomenon, projecting on buildings, but it seems to be.
There's a massive art scene here, and so the arts are generally supported financially, and so there's definitely like rotating projections happening here every summer. It's pretty neat to see these downtown buildings like totally covered in video art projections more than anything, and rather that than of course advertising. So it's a pretty special town. When I was actually visiting after my tour and during that tail end of the student strike, I was just like, I'm fucking moving here. This is gonna be my home. And the next February of 2013, I was there in the dead of winter just to make sure that I could get used to it.
Yeah, right. If you can't, it's quite a contrast from. I guess were you born in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, born and raised in Puerto Rico. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite a contrast in terms of the climate. It doesn't get much more contrasting there than between Puerto Rico and Montreal. I guess it gets cold in the winter there.
Yeah,
But Montreal, I mean, it really does have a special kind of like, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in Montreal that's not happening anywhere else in North America, would you say? I mean, it's like that social movement, for example, but also other things.
Yeah, it's a very special place in North America, particularly because you could really see what multi-generational movements can do. The people who were doing organizing the student strike in 2012 were standing on the shoulders of giants, and by that I mean like here in the late 60s and the early 70s there was something called the Quiet Revolution, which is not quiet at all. It was actually quite militant, and there were many things that were won through that revolution. for instance, Quebec used to be an extremely Catholic place. There's churches everywhere. They call it the city of a thousand steeples. If you go any sort of altitude, you would see hundreds of churches. Like almost every third block, there's a Catholic church, and women to the church were essentially baby factories. And a normal Quebecois family used to have like 13, 15 children. That's totally normal. And women really emancipated themselves from the very patriarchal way of doing things. But also, it was very much a working class movement. It was a leftist movement too, even though that it was a leftist nationalist movement. So basically, these folks wanted the independence of Quebec from English Canada, because they saw themselves as as the working tools of the rich Anglophone elites, and through a lot of the wins. There's things that I tell people about here that they're just kind of blown away. For example, there's Comité Logement, which are basically tenants' rights organizations for every neighborhood, right. And these are paid for by the government, but the government has no say or can't even touch the decision-making process. And so all these Comité Logement, the majority of them are run by anarchists right now. And so basically all of our friends, if we have an issue with a landlord, we just go to them, and they have the tools to help us out. And they're extremely radical and extremely militant.
How did that come about there? How did those committees come to exist in the first place? Do you know the history there?
I don't know all the nitty gritty, but I just know that when people the movement was so strong that they basically forced the government to allocate a humongous amount of money for the what they call a community sector. So, for instance, here in Quebec, it's the only place in North America really that there's a province-wide network of sexual assault support centers for women, and this is all paid for by the government. But the actual network is an anti-capitalist and feminist network from its inception. So all anti-capitalist and feminist politics are within the charter, or the founding documents of the place, and so they have to be funded every year. So even in remote areas, a woman gets sexually assaulted, she will have a support from these places. Another interesting thing, and actually, like my in-laws, who used to be communists, and this is like another really funny part of the Quebec anarchist scene, but I'll get into that in a second. But my in-laws really push for government paid for daycare system. And so right now in Quebec, and for many years, since at least the late 70s, because of these communist parents that are organized, I have a child now. Like we pay $8 a day for the best childcare. It's higher standards that in the private sector, to the point that even wealthy people would rather have their kids on the government run childcare system. And for people like me who do like militant media, who are not really interested in making huge salaries or whatever, all these things that we have in Quebec, like rent control, which is another great thing. My rent here is really, really fucking cheap.
That allows you to work. That allows you to make all these great videos without having to spend all your time coming up with that.
Exactly. And so when I tell people about Quebec, I just say like, think about, how do we make our movements multi-generational, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time. Because I used to live in Vancouver, and in Vancouver, it seemed like the anarchist scene just had to reinvent itself because the city was so fucking expensive to live.
So terrible. I'm amazed that there's even any anarchists left in Portland, and which obviously there are, as anybody can see lately. But this place, our rent has gone up by 250% since we moved to Portland in 2007. Yeah, and that's been typical of people living in the main cities throughout the West Coast, including Vancouver. I don't know about the percentages, but it's been just terrible there with gentrification, and Victoria as well.
Yeah, and Victoria as well. Like all my friends. I mean, I left partly to move to another place like Montreal, but also partly, I mean, my last year I was touring, and my last year in Vancouver, and the last year I lived in a camper van. The camper van that I bought to tour, I eventually became my home because it was really all I could afford. And
Sounds very familiar.
yeah, no, I know it's not a special story. I mean, I
Yeah.
saw more camper vans in Vancouver once I lived there. When I noticed, like, holy shit, that's a lot of people living in vans,
Right.
because it doesn't get that cold in the winter, and you can do it.
Mhm.
But all my friends, all my anarchist friends, my best friends, I would say, all left
Yeah.
Vancouver.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and when I look around here, there's so many people are teenagers, and they're probably still living with their parents. So, which is how they can afford to be an anarchist in Portland, I think, in many cases. Really. Of course, there's also some who successful Twitter code writers who are also anarchists and can afford to live in the city. But yeah. Franklin, you've been making fantastic media since long before YouTube existed, which for a lot of people a bit younger than us is sort of like a new and different idea, I suppose, because everybody can make videos and put them up on YouTube these days, whether the quality is any good or not. But I think there was a real I mean, it was I hate to say it I sound like such an old fart saying it, but in a sense, there is sort of a golden age of some aspects of the internet before YouTube and Facebook got a kind of a stranglehold over a lot of sort of our means of communication in a sense. And I don't know if you have any, if my bunch of non sequiturs here inspires any kind of thoughts on the history of trying to make popular education and communicate through videos on the very ever changing landscape of the internet over the past 20 years. But curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really exciting time. I published my first videos online in 1998. Back then, I was people might laugh at this, but I have no regrets and very proud of the work that I did. I was a marijuana activist. I wanted to help remove the penalties that people receive from smoking a plant. And back then, I was not even a pothead. I just thought that the laws around it were terrible. So my first internet project was called Hempcyclopedia, which was an encyclopedia of marijuana and hemp and medical marijuana, just basically talking about this plant. Things that people now take for granted, like back in the 90s, was like, it felt like cutting edge information, and the internet just sort of provided us this avenue where we could just skip over having to have a TV channel sort of broadcast our videos, and gave us the opportunity to become our own TV stations. And so in 1998, I bought the domain hempcyclopedia.com to start putting videos from the interviews that I was doing. And I remember the website became fairly popular to the point that I actually had to take out the videos because I couldn't afford the bandwidth from the videos. And but I was already super excited that I could just do that. And in 1999, I think is what I bought the domain submediatv.com. And in 2000, in earnest, started the website and started putting my work up there. And it was a kind of like a mishmash of stuff. It was music videos. It was stuff from Hempcyclopedia. It was short narrative films. So it's like, I was part of a really neat indie film community in Atlanta, and so in a way, like, YouTube was really exciting when it came out because it didn't have those bandwidth limits. It certainly made things easier, but as we see, it sort of also has become like a bit of a monopoly, and for us, we've noticed throughout the years that our content gets throttled through algorithms. Like, our stuff doesn't get showcased.
I was wondering about that with the algorithms, because I would think that there may be like tricks to getting to working those algorithms in your favor, but which I imagine you've tried, but they tend to work against you. Is your experience? Yeah.
I mean, in a sense, I mean, the one thing that Submedia, I should just say, was me for a long time, and then it became a collective, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But I'm definitely on an anti-capitalist tip here, and so I didn't ever wanted to opt into ads, specifically because YouTube controls the ads that you see. They could put ads for join the army, for example, or products that I might not even agree with. But on another end, like I've always wanted to make my media free, and so once you opt out of ads, then that YouTube wants to make money with these videos, and so it's the folks who opt into ads that are more likely to get put in the sidebar on the related videos. But also, and this is something the far right figured out and did fairly well, is that if you have longer videos and you opt into ads, and you have more opportunities for those videos to be played in a single episode. So that's why a lot of these far right websites or video creators create 1 hour or plus videos, because they can probably have like 5 or 6 ads. And so YouTube will favor those videos because in the end it makes them more money. And it really became super damaging for us on the left, because videos on the right were getting like hundreds of thousands of views, and a lot of young people got radicalized on that end because of that. And we're just sort of now reeling from that, and thankfully now there's like a new wave of lefty video creators who create like amazing stuff that
and it does get a lot of views too, right? A lot of the lefty stuff as well.
For sure. I think that because of the backlash, because of Charlottesville, because of Heather Heyer's death, a lot of these social media companies have had to look at themselves and try to do something to sort of curb a lot of these sort of right-wing ideologies. But at the same time, they see anarchists as the exact opposite. And so this whole idea of both sidism, and so if they ban far right websites, or far right groups, they'll try to ban far left, what they consider far left projects, so that to appease both sides, like, oh look, we took care of Antifa as well as you guys, so don't look at us, we're just taking care of everybody. And so I mean, it's a stupid policy, but in the end, a lot of the work that I've done, and people who have followed Submedia throughout the years will always know that maybe the playback of the video hasn't been the smoothest, and that's because I've always tried to use services that are not going to censor us, and that are not going to spy on users. And so for the longest time, I've been using archive.org. It's a great organization that predates YouTube. And
amazing, the Wayback Machine. I mean, without the Wayback Machine, I mean, and archive.org, how much stuff would be lost out there that's proven to be really useful or crucial in a lot of different situations. And there's so much stuff that's lost out there, right? From indie media. I was talking to Jenka Soderberg about how there's servers that are sitting in places that have loads of videos and all sorts of stuff from indie media that hasn't been online for like 15 years.
And that the Wayback Machine, that they're archived on the Wayback Machine.
Some of it is, like some of it was, right, but then bits and pieces here and there. But then there's a lot that never got archived too.
Yeah, no, I to switch gears, not to switch gears completely, but yeah, I mean, indie media was. It should be acknowledged, especially since it just turned 20 years last year. For people who don't know, it was a worldwide network of independent media makers, but it was also a website, and it was a website that was a pioneer in microblogging, blogging, video publishing, audio publishing. I mean, it was the open publishing platform before any of this stuff existed. I mean, I know I sound like an old person talking about this.
No, it's good. It's good to give that background. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I am who I am because I joined the Atlanta Independent Media Center, or Atlanta IMC, or Atlanta Indie Media. I was covering the war, the protests against the upcoming war with Afghanistan after 9/11, and I met anarchists there for the first time, and I saw great films at screenings that Indie Media would hold, and it just really changed my entire perspective of what filmmaking could be. That we don't have to follow any rules. We can appropriate media, and we can have a really radical message there out there. And I saw some awesome films that actually come from Oregon, Pickaxe and Breaking the Spell. Both those films were massively influential in me, and really pushed me. And I wanted to make music videos for a living. I wanted to be a video artist, and these films were so inspiring that I just decided, fuck it, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna be an anarchist filmmaker. I'm gonna destroy any prospects of a respectable career, and I'm gonna join with others to change this world. So yeah, big ups to Indie Media,
Good
and big ups to
decision.
I'll make it happen. Yeah.
Just responding to a couple of comments I'm seeing on different platforms. First of all, in regards to a statement I made earlier about teenagers and tech and tech coders, that there are other poor people who live in shared housing in this city with high rents. And yes, I totally acknowledge that, and I'm sorry if I said anything offensive. My building that I live in is a very good example of that. There's people that used to live in 2-bedroom apartments on the wages of artists who played for tips, and now it's like 3 or 4 people crammed into the same apartment. And but then moving on to another comment here, which I think might lead us well into sharing one of those video clips. I know you're working on you're coming out with a film soon that's about the Wet'suwet'en rebellion that happened across Canada prior to the pandemic, and somebody is wondering if you have any thoughts about Indigenous anarchism, and which I imagine you might. And and then there's something else. But what's this film coming up, Franklin, that you're working on? There's a film I saw on the top of your Twitter feed.
Yeah, for sure. It's we don't have quite a working title yet. We would like to call it Yinta, but we're still awaiting permission from the chiefs to use that name. Yinta is the Wet'suwet'en word for land, and for people who don't know, the Wet'suwet'en are an indigenous nation on the west coast of so-called Canada, in an area of so-called British Columbia. Their territory is about the size of New Jersey, and they've been the caretakers of that territory for over 10,000 years. If you believe science, if you believe their stories, they've been there since time immemorial. And about 10 years ago, I was invited with a bunch of other anarchists by the Wet'suwet'en to do an action camp. They had just built the cabin, and the folks who built the cabin used to live in Canada. We call them reserves, but it's the same as reservations in the States. Like they used to live in their federally mandated tiny piece of land, and these folks were like, no, we're going to retake our original territory. And so they went back to their territory, built a pipeline, a cabin in the way of several proposed oil and gas pipelines. Some of that oil will be coming from Alberta's tar sands, which I can get into that. Other would be gas pipelines that are coming from fracking in northeast.
And you've done videos on tar sands and on fracking and all these things you're talking about. If we had links, if we could highlight your sentences with little hyperlinks, we'd be linking them to lots of videos.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, maybe I have
You want to share a clip?
The second video that I made about the Wet'suwet'en. It's called the Action Camp, and it was about it's about the second action camp. So let me share my screen here, and let's see if we can make this happen, and share audio too. Here we go.
First experiment.
Wet'suwet'en Territories, August 2012. A few comrades and I hit the road to join dozens of people in the third annual Unistoten Action Camp, a convergence called by members of the Wet'suwet'en Nation to prevent oil and gas pipelines from entering into their territory. As we sped away from the visual noise of the city, the natural splendor of the Pacific Northwest revealed itself. Canyons, rivers, lakes, and mountains beckoned us to abandon our gasoline-powered chariot and invited us to walk and swim through them and leave behind the spectacle of industrial civilization. But even in these remote areas, the insatiable appetite of capitalism demands the further ravaging of nature. Mining highways, dams, clear-cut logging, and now oil and gas infrastructure are not only defacing the landscape, but also the cultures that have lived in this region for millennia.
We're opposing these projects because we have very few areas that are pure and still in a natural state. For example, the river behind us, we actually can still drink that water, and we still hunt this area. And industry has destroyed most of our areas, and we have very little left. And we're going to fight to protect that for the future generations, our children, grandchildren. If we don't protect it, there'll be nothing here, and we'll be saying that we used to have moose and we used to have fish, and they're not even going to know that as part of their diet if we don't step up and start protecting it today.
After driving for over 1,000 kilometers, we arrived at the boundary of the Unistoten land, the pristine Maurice River. But before any of us could cross the bridge and enter the territory, we had to follow the free, prior, and informed consent protocol.
Protocol is ancient. It's thousands of years old. The land taught us how to do this, to protect it. Also to see you act out your knowledge of self, which helped us keep the integrity of the land and the people. So free, prior, informed consent is nothing new. It's been asleep for a couple of 100 years because of colonization. Our responsibilities were taken from us, from military and from police and from oblates, Catholic Church. Pretty much put the fear into our ancestors a couple 100 years back, telling them that they can no longer act on their lands in the ways that they have.
Much of the area of what is now known as British Columbia is made up of land that was stolen from indigenous communities. The Unistoten clan of the Wet'suwet'en Nation are asserting their rightful ownership of this forested wilderness to stop a natural gas transport project called the Pacific Trails Pipeline, or PTP.
Well, the PTP project is a project that kind of snuck through under the radar. It's a pipeline project that's proposed by the Apache Corporation. And they want to run a natural gas pipeline from Summit Lake, BC to Kitimat, BC. And the spot that we're sitting in right here, right now, is a tenting area, but it's also the center point on a GPS coordinates for a right-of-way that they want to put through here. So we're occupying the lands and we're stopping PTP from coming in.
This year's camp attracted over 150 people who came from as far east as Montreal and as far south as Florida. The camp organizers opted not to tap large environmental NGOs for material support and instead reached out to grassroots community-based allies.
We were invited by Mel Basil and later on by some of the other chiefs here to come and help them stand up against the pipelines. And we are all about stopping the pipelines at this point. We're all about doing Indigenous solidarity. And so we get to do both. And we get to bring a bunch of people from Vancouver who maybe have never experienced an action camp or being welcomed by First Nations people on their own territory. And they get to experience that. They get to learn new skills and share their own and share food and camaraderie and culture and build something. We built a small city here, practically, and I think it's really good for everybody's morale, because people feel like they can actually do something physically. They can physically do something to stop the pipelines. You can't get funding from Tides Canada or George Soros or any large foundation to do direct action training.
Out of the proposed pipeline projects that will cross through Unistoten land, Pacific Trails is the first one slated to begin construction and poses an immediate threat. The PTP project is a partnership between Apache Canada and CANA and EOG Resources, formerly known as Enron Oil and Gas. The 463-kilometer PTP pipeline will connect the liquefied natural gas port in the Pacific Ocean to the Spectra Energy West Coast Pipeline, with the aim of transporting gas extracted through fracking to overseas markets. Others, like the Enbridge Northern Gateway Pipeline, would transport tar sands oil from Fort McMurray, an extraction project that is devastating the nature and indigenous communities in the Athabasca region of northern Alberta. Sue Deranger is a member of the Athabasca Chippewayan First Nation, who traveled from Fort McMurray to show her solidarity with the Unistoten.
They're blocking the Enbridge pipeline, which is going to haul the bitumen from our community that is affecting our lives so intensely. The cancers that are there, the animals that are sick, the water that's polluted. There's such a connection, because if there's no tar sands, then there's no pipeline. If there's no pipeline, there's less for them to do.
These dirty energy schemes not only threaten nature and indigenous people in the north, but also have global implications. If decisive action is not taken to stop the flows of oil and gas, the effects of global climate change could be catastrophic for people, plants, and animals all over the world. This is why natives and their allies travel from far away to come together at this camp.
At this point, people know that, I think most people realize that appealing to the Harper government or the BC government is really hopeless. And the only real way to stop this, especially this particular pipeline, which is already approved, the way to stop it is going to be to actually shut them down, slow them down, cost them money, scare their investors away. And this is going to involve, going to do direct action.
This camp is designed to create a culture of resistance. What we are doing is we are showing our young ones who are in this camp that there is peaceful resistance. There is also a way of the warrior, and there is also uncompromising stance.
Our territories have never been ceded. We've never surrendered anything here. These territories belong to our people, and we have no intention of giving it up or surrendering it to any entity.
Yeah. So, can you hear me?
Yeah, brilliant. I had just muted your mic when the video started because it sounded better to me that way. So I figured that must be the case for other people.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's one.
That was my second trip there, and these folks have become my friends, and I've been making videos about them almost every year or every other year, including some stuff for Al Jazeera's AJ Plus that really helped them put them on the map.
Oh, great!
And
yeah, that gets a lot of the Al Jazeera has a lot of viewers, and AJ Plus is fantastic.
Yeah. So the film that I'm working on there's these two other filmmakers who I've met actually while going in the territory, who have been also supporters, and they approached me last year after I finished my stint at Submedia. And I was trying to figure out what the fuck to do with my life. And they were like, look, you have all this footage. We have all this footage. Let's make a feature film. But the Wet'suwet'en needed a film more rapidly, because one of the pipeline companies actually was able to get into the territory with militarized RCMP. That's the federal police here in Canada. And they wanted to show the world what it was like to have an invasion of cops, heavily armed cops and pipeline workers through the territory. And so we made Invasion, which is like an 18-minute film about that first year with the pipeline company in there. And the Invasion it's been amazing to see that a lot of people. I mean, it was built as a tool for spreading awareness. But also as a fundraising tool, and it sort of achieved both things. Like people would do screenings and fundraise for the Wet'suwet'en. But it's also gone into a bunch of film festivals, which is something that I've never done in my life, and it's actually, I mean, it's never really been like my path, but it's definitely nice to have some sort of recognition and for people to want to see this story. So right now, I'm going to start editing the footage for the feature film, like hopefully tomorrow or the day after, because we just got our first bit of funding, and I'll be editing this for the next 9 months, working with a couple of directors and producers to make a feature film that tells, like, you know, the definite story of the Wet'suwet'en and their resistance to this pipeline. And the last thing I'll say, I know I've been talking a lot, is that for people interested in supporting them, the pipeline company will attempt to drill under the Wet'suwet'en River. That's the river that you saw in the film. That's a river that you can still drink water straight out of. It's the only time in my life that I've actually been able to do that. And if they, even on a test drill, if they fuck up, they could just really destroy that river. That's going to be happening in the next weeks. So people should really start looking north for news and not just look at the dumpster fire that's in the United States happening, but that up here, you know, last February we had an insurrection, an indigenous insurrection that paralyzed the country because of what's happening in the Wet'suwet'en Nation and their fight against pipelines. And people blocked railroad tracks. They blocked both major ports on the east and the west coast. They blocked highways. There were all kinds of different acts of sabotage that happened. There were marches. It was pretty huge. It was right before the pandemic, and it forced the government to talk to the Wet'suwet'en, which is something that they had never done. And this is bound to happen again in the coming days or weeks. So you know, look out for Wet'suwet'en or Unist'ot'en Camp, or on Facebook or Twitter or even on the World Wide Web, and you'll find tons of information about how to plug in.
My impression with that uprising that was going on across Canada in support of the Wet'suwet'en was like with this decision to block the tracks across the country, it struck me that the tactic was like one that was just like it's just spread around and everybody knew, okay, this is what we're doing now. Kind of like with other movements that involved certain tactics that just became the thing, like with Occupy Wall Street. Okay, we take over the nearest park to the biggest bank and see what happens. But that was it was there were blockades across the country for thousands of miles. Huh?
Yeah, and it's actually, there's a couple interesting facts around the blockades. One is that a lot of indigenous reserves were built close to what Canada calls critical infrastructure, like highways and railroad tracks, and because of the proximity of indigenous people to those pieces of critical infrastructure, it definitely makes it easier for them to block those things. But you know, the indigenous folks are put there essentially to be a working force for those pieces of critical infrastructure. But in 1990, not too far from Montreal, there's a Mohawk community called Kanesatake, and there was the settler community next to Kanesatake wanted to expand their local golf course into an ancient burial grounds, and people there, they petitioned, they protested, they did everything above board, and the city council just didn't give a shit, and they were going to move forward with adding another 9 holes of golf, and on top of the remains of this Mohawk community, and they just had it, and the women blockaded the road, and the provincial police of Quebec attacked them. And what followed was a 78-day siege in which armed Mohawk warriors from the Warrior Society defended this territory, and not only against the Canadian the Quebec Provincial Police, but also against the Canadian Army itself, that even had like submarines in the lake nearby. It had like thousands of troops surrounding, really like what was like 30 armed Mohawks and the community that supported it. And the government backed down because of the same thing. People all
across
around
Canada, across the United States.
Yeah. In Canada, they blocked everything. They blocked bridges, they blocked trains, and the army just basically had to back out. And to this day, I have friends in that community. To this day, I can go with at their invitation. I can go visit that burial ground and see that historic place that has inspired so many people around the world, especially Indigenous people. And so, like, people here don't have a short memory about these things. It's really important that, you know, these tactics still work today. They, you know, things are still transported by truck and train, and blockading them is not super hard.
Yeah, and
so-
the ports, of course.
and the ports too.
Don't forget the ports. Yeah.
No, and the ports are massively important. And in here in Canada, you know, there's just two major ones. You know, like, I mean, there's others, but you know, you block Vancouver, you block Halifax, and then nothing's coming in, or going out, right? And so yeah, this could just very well happen again in the coming weeks. So keep an eye out.
One of the things that I was struck by in the video, and that is something I identify with so much, and I hopefully lots of other people do as well. But what the woman, one woman was talking about, how people involved with this kind of activity get to experience what it's like to be in a community, and to be and to they may be perhaps they're putting their lives on the line, or risking arrest or prison sentence, but in doing so, they're going to be discovering a lot of friends and this kind of camaraderie that you might not find in any other situation, except when people are taking those kinds of risks. And it's I always encourage people who are depressed to just to be, you know, get involved with Solidarity somewhere, and it could be the best thing for your mental health, as well as for other. I mean, it's just an aspect of the whole thing that I know that you are probably quite familiar with, but having lived in many different places and traveled quite a lot, and you have friends all over the world, and you know, I mean, it's maybe a bit self-indulgent, but one of the things I like the best about big protests is that I get to see friends from all kinds of different places. You know,
It's super social. It's like a really and like now with the pandemic, you know, you get to be outdoors, you know, like it's really one of the only safe social events that we have. You know, wear a mask, go out there, join people on the streets, you know. And for people in Canada, just remember that, you know, jail in the States, prison is really bad. And I'm not going to say that in Canada it's not bad, but, you know, from all my friends who've been in prison here, it's like, it's not a huge deal. You know, it's like, don't be too scared about prison here. You know, it's not the same thing as down south. But also the sentences, the punishments here are much lighter than in the US. So I think that people should keep that in mind.
Yeah, and also here in Portland, the district attorney, Mike Schmidt, recently dropped all the charges of people who were arrested in the course of the protests over the past 3 months.
Amazing.
And that's what a progressive district attorney can potentially do. So that's also something to bear in mind, that you might get charged with something, but that doesn't mean you're going to. Of course, it's terrifying to get charged with something that could result in years in prison. But you know, and that's a punishment in itself, is just having a prison sentence hanging over your head until the charges are dropped, if the charges are dropped. But you know, the charges do get dropped, and launching, you know, frivolous lawsuits against activists has a long history, and the charges often get dropped, and you know, you can sue the police departments and win, you know, as they just did in Toronto. And you were there also at the G20. I was looking at the list of some of the different films you've made, and there were many of the same protests I was at, including that one. But they just dropped the charges, or they just there was just a big financial reward for people who were
payout. Yeah,
payout, yeah.
To make $20,000. I mean, 10 years later, and obviously a very traumatic experience being in that massive. A lot of them were in this massive sort of makeshift holding center where they were treated like shit, and they were there for days and days on end with no bathroom breaks. You know, no places to sleep. You know, I mean, we've seen, this is not new. Like, we've seen this in other places like New York and other places as well. But you know, essentially the Toronto police lost control that day, June 26, 2010, when anarchists essentially like thwarted their $1 billion security budget and destroyed half of the financial district and the shopping district of downtown Toronto. in protest for the G20, and the police response was just to arrest everybody they saw on the street. It was the largest mass arrest in Canadian history. They arrested people who were just shopping, people who were just crossing the street. There's one particular video, if people can find it, like a bunch of really naive folks that thought that if they sang the Canadian national anthem, they will be immune. And as soon as they finished singing, the police just charged them and attacked them and arrested them violently.
Wow.
But at the same
There was
time,
that reminds me of just the year before in Pittsburgh. I don't know, were you at the G20 in Pittsburgh the year before? And there were a bunch of folks, I think sorority sisters, who had been locked out of their building and were trying to convince the police that they really were not protesters, and they started doing a football chant, but they got tear gassed anyway.
oh yeah, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, it radicalizes people. It sucks. Tear gas is not fun, but it it gives you a taste of the state brutality and what they can do.
And they spent $1 billion preparing for that. And I know you said that already. I just wanted to emphasize that, because that was not a typo or something. That's spent 10 times as much as had ever been spent on security at a summit like that, I believe. And the most that had ever been spent, I believe, was the year prior in Pittsburgh, when they spent $100 million.
Yeah, no, it was incredible, and that same year we were protesting. We were organizing a big convergence against the Olympics in February of that year, and so all of these things got lumped into one, what they call a JIG, Joint Intelligence Group, and so all the law enforcement agencies in Canada were part of that, and they all had a piece of that budget, and I did the equivalent to an access to information request or FOIA in Canada on myself, and like the amount of time they spent, following me and surveilling me, looking where I went to dumpster dive, looking to where I went drinking, or going to my girlfriend's house. I mean, it was such a waste, because I was making media,
Yeah, you're like easy to find, right?
Yeah. We had
it's not like you're hiding when you're doing that.
Yeah, no, we had two cops infiltrate our media center and become journalists for our independent media center as well, for the Vancouver Media Co-op, and that's just that was just us in the West Coast. Like, people out here in the East Coast had some really, really long-term, like, deep infiltration that really did a lot of damage. It was very COINTELPRO style, a lot of inserting rumors, a lot of creating gossip to sort of disrupt things internally.
And you discovered that in the FOIA request as well?
That one was not my FOIA request, but like other people's, and also like court disclosure for all the folks who faced charges for the conspiracy. They were charged with conspiring to create a riot during the G20. All those people, most of those people, got off. A couple people did a year or 13 months in jail. But a lot of those people also got money now from that.
Yeah, good. What kinds of divisive things were the undercover cops doing to divide people?
Oh God, I read this such a long time ago, but it was definitely like gossip. If I remember correctly, around
relationships,
and such. Yeah, and also some of these folks trying to get romantically involved with people in the scene. There's people should look at the CrimeThink website for a report back about that particular. The town is called Guelph. That's one of the towns, Guelph and Kitchener, that got really infiltrated by these two different undercover cops who really use identity politics to get themselves in there. One was a person of color. The other person claimed that she was a battered. She was coming out of an abusive relationship and used those false stories to gain entry into our movements, who are movements that are compassionate, that support people of color, that support people who have been in shitty relationships. So we should keep that in mind.
Yeah, really, yeah. When you go to these film events and film festivals and stuff like that, Franklin, do you wear that wonderful mask out at those events as well?
When I do Q&A, yeah, I've been wearing this more and more, particularly because the world has changed. I have not really done a lot of interviews on video, and my photo is not really super out there, and so I really like my anonymity. And it's not that I'm super famous or anything like that, but it's just a big, bad, dangerous world out there, and now I have a family, so I like to keep things as chill as possible. So. And also, this mask is fucking awesome. So
it is a wonderful mask, absolutely. But I was just wondering about, because there's so many different potential reasons why you might want to do that, and you've done it for a very long time. And I remember when you interviewed me for one of your shows a long time ago, and you were, I mean, it was the first time in my life I ever had the experience of talking to what appeared to be like a video avatar or something. What you were, you weren't even wearing a mask. You were like a video. You were using an avatar, I guess, at the time.
That was the Stimulator, and that's the show. Well, it was called "It's the End of the World as We Know It, and I Feel Fine," and that's like the video show that I did for the longest time for Submedia, like I think 15 years. In a really sort of bad move in terms of timing. I was just so tired of making that show because I did it for so long. But I ended it right after Trump got elected. So maybe I can play a little piece of that. So
yeah, sure.
So
great.
The final, "It's the End of the World as We Know It, and I Feel Fine."
Oh, yeah.
The end of the world as we know it, I feel fine.
Good morning, slaves, and welcome to another edition of It's the End of the World as We Know It, and I Feel Fine, the show where we wash down tacos with liberal peers.
I'm hungry. Let's get a taco.
Donald Trump will be the 45th president of the United States, winning the most unreal, surreal election we have ever seen. This candidacy starting on an escalator ride 1 year ago.
I am your host, the Stimulator, and after being held hostage for a year and a fucking half to the torturous political freak show that is the U.S. election,
It was horrible.
on Tuesday, November 9th, peeps around the world watching stunned horror as pundits and news anchors announced that a fascist fucking reality TV star had been selected for the most powerful motherfucking position on earth.
This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
While world leaders like Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, and the Philippine psychopathic Jefe Rodrigo Duterte are fucking stoked to have an unstable, feckless megalomaniac with no political or military experience in the White House, politicians in Europe, on the other hand, are freaking the fuck out.
We've actually elected an internet troll as our president.
This sentiment was summed up by France's ambassador to the United States, Gerardo Rod, who, with the notable flair for the dramatic that the French are known for, claimed that Trump's election signaled the end of the neoliberal era and that, quote, "the world is collapsing before our eyes."
U.S. Border Protection. How can I help you?
Pues sí, you can help me. Devuélveme mi trabajo.
And while the not-so-controlled demolition of the global political and economic order sounds like it'd be fucking great news, it's far-right nationalist parties who are the ones doing the stuff.
I guess my connection
we
got
got some buffering going on there.
buffering going on. Well, I apologize for that, but you get the idea.
It's fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah,
and that really, when you present things, when you present perspective artistically like that, it gets a lot more interest from a lot more people, doesn't it? I mean, when you can entertain people as well as inform them, it really is a powerful medium. Huh?
Yeah, no, and I think that one of the things that when I started entering the anarchist scene, one of the things that used to bum me out is people just took themselves too fucking seriously, and so I just really wanted to do something that was fun, where I could talk however the fuck I wanted to talk, where I could play hip hop, which is something that, punk was the music of the anarchist scene, and I've always been a hip hop head. And so I've been really lucky that people liked it, and that people supported me making it through small donations throughout the years, and I got to learn a whole bunch, and I got to talk to great people like you as well. So yeah, it was it was a good time because not a lot of people were doing these types of like video blogs or video news shows or whatever, and nowadays there's like a gazillion people doing it, but back then it just felt like we were pioneering in something, and it's not like a way to sort of give ourselves a pat in the back. It was just like, wow, like this technology is really allowing us to speak directly to our scene, and we don't really have to like, you know, hope that we reach like the massive audience. Like really my goal has always been to keep people who are interested in doing resistance work, to keep them interesting, to entertain them, to make them laugh, to keep them inspired, right? I remember one time Amy Goodman came to speak in Vancouver, and the person who introduced her talked about, you know, why the Catholic Church was so successful. And she said, look, the Catholic Church is successful because, and you know, and Catholic Christian churches are successful because they preach to the choir. They preach to the choir every week, you know, and so people would say like, don't preach to the choir. She's like, no, definitely preach to the choir. Keep people into it, you know, tap people in the back, tell them that the work that they're doing is awesome. Yeah. And I really always keep that close to my heart because in the end, you know, it's I mean, I really take inspiration from your work as well, because your work is also like that, like a celebration of resistance movement, and I don't think, you know, people who do this stuff on the street, who really throw down, they're not doing it for the money, for the paycheck or anything like that. And so the least that we can do is just giving a big ups and just you know, and thank them for their courageous work.
Be good cheerleaders.
Yeah,
absolutely. Franklin, you have any predictions for the next few weeks or months in the United States for our largely U.S. audience here?
Well, I mean, I really hate to make predictions, so maybe I'll predict the things that I would like to see. Maybe I will call it my projections.
Oh, good. What are your projections?
You know, total destruction of the United States, full-fledged leftist revolution, returning of indigenous lands to the rightful owners, the liberation of Black and brown folks everywhere, the destruction of capitalism, the trial of Donald Trump and his cronies by our comrades.
Whether or not we get that quite that far, it seems like a pretty ripe time for radical movements to be taking place. I mean, like when there's evictions happening, we've been hearing about like neighbors spontaneously coming out to confront the police in places like California and New York, and I think that might happen a lot more often. That's
yeah, I mean, we were talking off camera before we went live, and I'll have to say that, and I'll tell the audience like what I told you, that I was, when Trump got elected, I was so blown away by how quickly people organized in the United States, how quickly Antifa became a thing, how quickly, you know, people. I mean, I remember people just taking over the airports and just being like, "Holy fuck!" Like that's not a small thing, you know, blocking an airport, you know, it's a federal offense, and people are really putting themselves out there. Or even the inauguration of Trump, J20 was like unbelievably inspiring to see that. And so it's definitely a scary time. I don't want to like diminish that people should definitely be careful. People should wear masks, you know, wear fucking masks when you're out there on the street, not just for your security, but also because of COVID. Like, you know, right now we have an excuse to wear masks and not be criminalized for wearing masks. So for fuck's sake, put that shit on. And to learn, you know, to there's many, you know, if you go to the anarchist library .info, you know, there's many zines about security, about creating affinity groups, about, you know, keeping yourself safe. So don't, you know, just be careful out there. But I also hopeful that because of the work that people are doing on the streets, that I think that we are seeing some amazing changes happening, things that I never thought I would see in my lifetime. And so, you know, with that, you know, I'll just say, yeah, thank you again for having me here, David. I know.
Yeah, thank you.
let's do it again if you want.
I'd love to. Absolutely. Thanks again. See you soon.
All right. Bye, David. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. And thanks so much, everyone, for joining me for my discussion with Franklin Lopez for Fifth Estate Live, which you can hear every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, noon Central, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. GMT on the Facebook pages of Popular Resistance, KBOO Community Radio, and elsewhere. You'll find all the Fifth Estate Live episodes at fifthestate.org, where you can also subscribe to the physical magazine. The summer issue is out now. You can find these interviews and my other interviews archived in various places in the Discussions with David playlist at youtube.com/drovix and in audio form at soundcloud.com/davidrovix, at patreon.com/davidrovix, where you can also support my broadcasting efforts and check out lots of other content. Or if you look for This Week with David Rovix on any podcasting platform, you can find it all in audio form there. If you're somewhere in the region of Portland, Oregon, please go to artistsforrentcontrol.org and sign up for text notifications to be part of Portland emergency eviction response to help us mobilize against the coming waves of evictions. Remember, don't pay the rent and don't be afraid of your neighbors. Mutual aid will get us through. See you soon. Bye for now.